All right, in this tutorial, we're going to start messing with ASP.NET. That's active server pages using C Sharp and .NET framework. You've probably seen plenty of applications that run on your Windows desktop. You know, those could be any number of things, but what we've been doing historically in these tutorials is messing with WinForms. In this tutorial, we're gonna basically come up with a really simple example demonstration of how to use .NET to build a web application. So instead of something running on our client, on our desktop client, we're going to build something that's going to run in a browser, okay? So let's jump right in, new project. And what we want to do is you probably have, if you've been doing some of the other tutorials, you probably are kind of in this area of the new project dialog. What you want to do is switch over to web, right? And what we're going to do is just an empty ASP.NET web application, and I'm just going to call mine ASP.NET Mailer. Because what we're going to do is we're going to create a very simple form, a very simple form that allows the user to specify, a to address, a from address, a subject, and then a message, and then a send button, so that you can send an email from the web. Basically, is what we're going for here. So this is just a really simple example. It's going to touch on one, how to build and start tinkering with ASP.NET projects, and two, if you've never messed with mail clients, that sort of thing, maybe you get a little exposure to that as well. So once your project's been created, excuse me, come over here to your project, and we're going to right click on it and do add new item. And we want to add a web form, okay? So I'm just going to call this guy index.aspx. Index or default is probably what you want to go with here. Just for the sake of simplicity and doing how I'm doing it, I would just go with index, click add. And what you'll get is very simply just you'll see HTML. If we were to run this right now, we would get a blank page in a browser, right? So if you look at the top of Visual Studio up here where your play button is, you probably see the different browsers you have installed. I'm just going to leave mine on Chrome for now. If I hit play, what this will do is it will launch IIS in the background, Internet Information Server, and then what you get right now, or what you'll get from that, is basically what you have displayed in your page, right? So right now we have nothing. So if I come back in here and I stop my project and I just type something just to make sure that this is working right? So when I hit play, now what you're going to see is this is a test, right? So this is just the HTML. If we look at the source for this, very simply, it looks like, kind of what we saw back here in Visual Studio, okay? We'll close him again. All right. So what we want to do, and fortunately, Visual Studio is not so much like a Dreamweaver in the sense that making HTML is very, very simple. It's not hard, but it's not as robust either. So if you look down here, and I need to stop this guy. If you look down here, you'll see that there's a source view, which is what we have right here, and then there's also a design view, which is kind of a little more indicative of what it's going to look like in the browser once it's rendered, once the page is rendered. And then you can obviously split the two, right? Um, I don't honestly do a lot of design work inside of the design view, mainly because I feel like it's easier to mess stuff up than it is when you're in source view. So what I'll do is I'll typically work in here and just kind of build out my tables or my CSS or whatever here, instead of messing with design view and letting Visual Studio sort of write the code for me. Now, one thing is for sure, in terms of ASP.NET and being able to do things behind the scenes and control your web app a little, a lot more, or sort of more differently than, your traditional HTML form, is that you're going to get used to seeing this run at server tag, which means it's basically going to process this code um, on the server side, not on the client side. Essentially, is what that means. Um, So what we're going to do here, oh, and that's the other thing, is everything that you want to have in terms of programmability, you want to be inside these form tags or a form tag. Not necessarily this. You could add more forms. You could have multiple forms on one page. That's okay. But for this example, we're going to keep it really simple and just have one form. But all of our ASP.NET components and controls that we're going to add, so thinking our text boxes and our submit button and maybe a label to show status after we click send, it all needs to be inside of this form that's going to be set to run at the server. Okay. Um, so let's do maybe the easier part first. And if you don't have a lot of experience with HTML, that's okay. Um, you don't really need it, but it will certainly help you get through this a little bit faster. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a table, and I'm gonna say the width of the table is gonna be I don't know 60% for now, and we can mess with this later. All right, so there's our table. Um, I'm gonna add a row and a data element because basically what I want to end up with is two columns in my row. Okay, so let's do this. We'll just copy him over. And what I like to do often is just I like to put stuff in here and test as I go. So this would be column one, and this would be column two, right? So let's just run that and see what we get. We haven't done anything very magical yet, but we should see a table, column one, column two, right? Um, oops, I didn't mean to close that. It's okay. Um, okay, so what we need to start thinking about adding, right, is a couple of things. We want to add uh, a label, right? So again, we're going for a web mailer here, right? So we're going to specify a to email address, and then we'll probably need some sort of to text box, right? And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to copy these guys over a bunch of times, right? So that's to, this will cover from, subject, body, and then we'll have a send button, and then we'll have a label. Okay, so I'm just, instead of having to type all this in, I'm just kind of copying and pasting, then we can come back and mess with it, right? So let me just change these. And we're obviously not going to leave subject text box, that text in there. We're going to put actual text boxes in there. But I just want to build it incrementally so you can kind of see what's going on. The body is going to be another text box, right? And then on this guy, for the button, we don't really need anything text there. We're going to say send button here. And we, for the label, we don't really need anything. We'll say um, success, fail, right? And let's play this guy and see what we get. Oops. So what you see is we have two columns, right? One that says has our labels in it, and then this is where we're going to put our other content, right? Our text boxes, our button, and then a label that we can update. So let's do this now. We got to stop him again. Um, I'm going to move this guy. I'm going to align him to the center so it's not pushed up. And then I'm also going to throw a couple page breaks up here, which is just the BR tag. And when we run this again, we should see it a little more centered. There we go. All right. Cool. Okay, so let's get in here now and start messing with some ASP components, right? So for instance, or sort of what you're used to seeing with WinForms is you still have your toolbox over here on the left. If yours is you can't see it, it's probably just minimized. So just click on that and you can pin it against the side there. So we want to go for text box here, right? So there's a couple ways we can do that. We can either just type it manually ourselves and say, we want to do an ASP text box, just sort of like that. Or we can double click over here and you'll see that it adds it for us, right? And it kind of gives us all of the tags that we need to complete, right? So what we want to, in terms of ID, this is basically our instance ID. So this is how we're going to reference it anywhere else within our application. So this is going to be the to text box. So I'm just going to say to as our ID. As I mentioned, everything's got to run at server. If we don't run it at server, we won't be able to reference it. And I'll show you that in a few minutes, kind of the difference there. The text, I'm going to go ahead and specify something so I don't have to type this in every time. And this is kind of, again, I teach at UR, so this is kind of for them. So I created a Gmail account called isis398u at gmail.com that they could use, and whoever watches this can use as long as it's still out there to practice with this. So basically what we're saying though is we have an ID or a text box called to. It's going to run at the server. And we are going to pre-populate it with text that says isis398u at gmail.com. Now, one of the nice things about Visual Studio, right, if you select anywhere on the text box, over here in your properties, you're still getting text box properties, right? So what I'm going to do for the width of this text box is I'm going to set it to 99%. okay, of our uh, of our row basically, or of that column that we're working inside our table. So let's just run this now and see what we get. Now you'll see we have two. We have our text box, and this is, I guess, the size of our table essentially. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically copy and paste this over a couple times, right, to get the desired outlook or look that we're going for, right? So let's go ahead and we'll just copy this text box over a couple more times. So this is gonna be our from text box. This is gonna be our subject text box, and this is gonna be our body text box, right? Now, you'll notice when I paste the same ID over and over again, Visual Studio genericizes it, right? So we can come in and change these. So this is going to be from, this is going to be subject, and we'll call this body, right? The body of our email. Um, to and from, just for the sake of this, we're going to leave this the same because I'm going to send an email from myself to myself just so I can open Gmail and show you guys how that actually worked. Subject, so again, so I don't have to type it, I'm going to say um, demonstration on YouTube. And for my body, I'm just going to say this is the body text, period. Okay, so for a button, we need a button, right? So let's go ahead and just double click on our button. We'll get an ASP button. ID, I'm going to call it send. Text is what's actually displayed on the button, so I'm going to call that send, and that should take care of that for us. The last thing I want to have here is I want to have a label that's basically we're going to update after we try to send an email that says whether we ran into any problems or whether the email was actually sent. Okay. Now this isn't going to verify that the email address is correct or anything like that. This is just going to say if there was problems actually sending the mechanism to send the email if there were issues, not whether or not it will get delivered. And I'm just going to make the label be blank right now because we don't want to have anything in there to start with. Okay, so if I run this guy now, oh, I must not have closed. Oops, hang on a second. I must not have done that right. Uh, I guess it doesn't allow a text property. I think what it wants is you to put the text here. Let's see. Maybe we can do it this way. I know that code was added automatically, but this should do the trick, I believe. Yeah. And since we're not having any text by default, this should be fine as well. Ah, it still doesn't like it. Text property basically does not allow child objects. Oh, you know what? I was messing with the wrong thing. ESP button. We're just probably not closing a tag somewhere, I think. Let me get rid of him for a second and just close those. Let's see what we get here. Something obvious I'm missing. Doesn't like the label. Oh, it's up above. That's where the problem is. Stop you. Just undoing here and going back to the way it was. Let's see, where are we missing? Text box. ID equals. Missing a closing tag. Ah, there we go. Sorry about that. Need to close these tags off. There we go. It's always something simple, right? Let's try that again. Now we should see something like we expect to see, right? Um, to from subject. This is the body of the text. I must have some renegade text in there somewhere. And then we have our send button, right? So let's figure out where that B is. I must have just hit a button. Body. This is the body text. Body. break. Where's that B coming from? All right, so let's go design and let's just kill it. All right, there we go. Sometimes it is helpful to have design mode, I guess. Okay. Now, let me run that again. So what we have now, though, is we probably want this body text to be more of a text area than just a sort of a text box. So we can make this multi-line and we can make it a little bit bigger as well. So let's do that next. So if we come in here and we just select our text box, right? And then we say we want to make the height, where you at height? Say 150 pixels. And then what we can also do for text mode, it says single line. We can make that say multi-line. There's also password, so if you want to show stars or dots instead of what the user is actually typing, that's a property you can mess with as well. So we'll go multi-line here. And let's run it again. I think what we'll see is the font will change, but it'll do basically what we're looking for. Okay, so we have to, we have from, we have the subject line, we have the body, and then we have our send button. If I press send right now, nothing happens. The reason nothing happens is because we haven't hooked up any sort of event handler to that particular button, right? Okay, so let's do that next. Now it gets interesting, and now we're going to start messing with code behind our form here. Now you'll notice at the very top, Visual Studio adds this for you. At the top of our next page, there's actually an attribute called code behind, which specifies a CS file, a C# file, where we can actually write a bunch of C# code to do some really nice things, right? So let's go ahead and expand this guy, and let's double click on our code, right? So every ASP.NET form, sort of by default, comes with a page load event. So if you want something to happen when the page is loaded, you can put that sort of code in here. We, however, are really looking for something along the lines of how to handle an event when the send button is clicked, right? So what we can do is we can actually do you can basically click on the button, much like we did with the properties, and you'll see here are the events that are possible or associated with that particular component or control. Or we can simply type inside here and say on click, right? Same idea. And you can either point to a method that you already have, or we can create a new one, right? So I'm going to create a new one. If we come back here now, you'll notice that we now have our send click button. Cool. So let's do something. Let's try something very simple. Let's what do we call our label? Status. So let's just make sure our send button is working, and let's update when we press send. Let's update the text of our status button to send was clicked. All right, something just to test. We're not going to leave it this way, but we just want to make sure that everything's working like we think it is. Okay. If we run this guy and we get our browser and we click send, you'll notice that our label send was clicked shows up. Now, let me kind of expand a little bit what's going on here. So when you press this button, what ASP.NET does is basically a post back to the same page. So information does get, it's a post back to the same URL to update this particular label. This can get tricky. We won't go too deep in this, but this can get tricky when it comes to retaining values or retaining session information or retaining certain attributes or things that you might have set up inside of your page. And so there are kind of nuances and subtleties that kind of come along with messing with doing postbacks versus using something like Ajax or some other control that refreshes controls on the page without actually refreshing the page or posting back to the page. And that's a whole other tutorial, a whole other topic. But just want you to kind of be aware that if something's not functioning here, not in this particular example, but as you try to do this on your own, the way that you think it should, start to look back variables that check to see or methods that check to see if the call to this particular page was a postback or if it wasn't. That's probably where I would start looking if you're running issues. But we won't go too deep in there. We'll keep it simple for this particular example. Now, I mentioned earlier that everything had to run at the server that we wanted to be able to reference programmatically from our code behind. You'll see that when I started typing status, Visual Studio basically recommends that to me, right? Because it can see it in that page. Same with to, same with subject, right? Now, if I come back into my ASPX page and I remove that run at server, just going to cut it. You don't have to do this. I'm just going to show you. Um, it won't even, it's going to yell at me, but you'll notice that over on this side, if I start typing status, I don't see it, right? And that's because I can't reference that control because it's not being run on the server side. At that point, it would be trying to run that controller or manipulate that control on the client side. So we're going to make sure we leave that in. So anytime you go to reference a control that you've added to your form and you can't find it from your code behind, that's probably where you want to start, is make sure that you have that run at server tag in there. Okay. All right. So we're going to delete that because I don't want to leave that there for now. Actually, you know what? We'll just leave it there. We'll leave it there for now. But basically, what we want to do now is we want to actually send our email, right? So we've got this awesome form that we created that's going to allow us to supply a username, or I'm sorry, a to address, a from address, a subject, a body, and then we can click the send button, right, and update our label. So there's a library that is available to us called system.net.mail. And this is what we're going to use to actually send the email. Okay, so we're going to create a new mail message. Oops, mail message equals new mail message. And again, this is all going to happen whenever that send button is clicked. If that send button doesn't get clicked, none of this gets executed, right? So we'll say new mail message. And what you can do with the mail message, yeah, actually I went too fast. You can, there's a couple, it's an overloaded constructor, right? So you can either just to and from, um, to and from, or this one, which has to, from, and the subject and the body, which seems like a really nice, easy way for me to do this, right? So our to box that we have on our other page, on our form, is where we want to get the to address, right? From.text is going to give us our from address, subject.text, and then body.text, right? And just like that, we've essentially created a message object that already has where the message is going, who it's from, what the subject line should be, and what the text of the body should be. Okay. Next thing we need to do is, and you can mess with this. I'll just make this out, put this out there available to you. There's something called isBodyHTML, which basically allows you to specify whether or not you can send HTML in the body of the email. So if we wanted to really kind of see how this works, where we have the body text, what I'll do here is I'll just put this in bold, right? We'll say this is the, and I'll close the bold tag. So what we should see is this would be in bold and that would be in plain text. So that's just an attribute. If we didn't have this set to true, and I believe false is the default, you know, you wouldn't see the HTML tags or their effect, essentially. Okay, so we have our message created. Next thing we need is an SMTP client. If you know anything about the way mail works or email works, basically there's something called an SMTP relay, which handles all of the mail sending for you. So usually, if you've ever configured Outlook or you know, any other mail client, you probably have to specify, you know, the SMTP server, the port, that sort of thing. So this is what we're going to do here. And we're going to use Gmail because that's what I'm using for this particular example. So if we look at SMTP client, we're going to do host and we're going to do port, okay? So the host is going to be smtp.gmail.com. If you have a Gmail account, this works great. If you're going to use this with some other email address that's not Gmail or not hosted by Google, then you need to probably figure out what that is or what that should be. And almost certainly you can just look at your, if you, how many of us use Outlook or Lotus Notes or something, you can just look in there and figure that out probably. Gmail requires that the client have enabled SSL. So we're going to set that to true. What else do we need to do? Oh, we need to put credentials in, right? So client.credentials equals new credentials, right? System.net. I guess we could also just import this or you know, specify this up here and say you were going to use this, or you can just put the fully qualified path there as well. That works as well. Um, and this is the isis398u@gmail.com. And the password, I don't care if you guys know because I don't use this, University of Richmond. Okay. The next thing we want to do is send away, right? And we're going to send our message. And then if all goes well and we make it to this point, we're going to say status dot text equals mail was sent successfully. Now, because this is a little touchy and a lot of things could go wrong here, right? I'm going to put this in a try catch block. That way we can catch or trap the exception. And then we also know when it fails, right? Exception. Oops, I'm doing this wrong. Catch exception. And what we'll do is we'll just say we want to see what the exception is. We'll trace the stack. Okay, so with this very simple amount of code, what we should get is the ability to send an email via SMTP relay using this account to wherever we specify. And so I'm going to send an email from myself to myself. But I think we've covered all the bases here, so let's give it a shot. I'm going to go ahead and log into, while that's loading, I'm going to go ahead and log into Gmail. And let's see what we get here. Okay. So I have isis398u@gmail.com. That's where we're sending it to. This is what we're sending from. Demonstration on YouTube will be our subject. And then the body is going to look something like that. So if I click send, I get bombed. It doesn't like that there's HTML tags in there. That's interesting. Um, okay. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do, just so we don't have to make this overcomplicated. Let's we can leave isBody message.isBody HTML equal to true. But what we're going to do is I'm going to come in here and just remove those tags. I guess Visual Studio is trying to be too smart for me here. I think I've run into this before, and I think what you have to do is trap that exception and ignore it. And just say, yeah, I'm trying to do this, or I want to allow this. But for now, we won't try and figure that out. We'll just keep going, marching on. So let's close this guy. All right, so this is our refreshed form, right? No more HTML tags. I'm going to click send. Hopefully this goes a little bit better. Mail was sent successfully. And we should see over here, you just noticed that I got mail from Gmail. It's from me. It says demonstration on YouTube. This is the body text, right? So success, right? We were able to send the email. That's awesome. So let me show you just one more little thing before we go. Let's say that we didn't actually hard code these here, um, but we still wanted to have them populated. I'll show you one other way we could do that. And we'll also kind of demonstrate this whole idea of is something a postback or not, just to kind of get you on the right track in case you need to test that over. I'm going to come up here to my page load event, and basically I'm going to say, um, just to give you an idea if something, or how to do this actually, when the page loads, this event gets fired no matter what. So what I'm going to say is 2.text equals ISIS398u from.text, oops, equals ISIS ISYS398u@gmail.com, which I left off right above there, at gmail.com. Subject.text, this is a test, or whatever you want to say. And we said body.text equals demonstration for YouTube. Now, if we run this guy, this basically has the same effect as what we had hard-coded here before, right? This method's going to get executed as the page is loaded, and we're basically going to set those values on the way in, or as the page loads. And you'll notice that they'll show up how we want it to. There we go. Again, a very, very simple example of how to do this, just to kind of get some exposure to ASP.NET and maybe how to send or create a mail client or send email via the web or via WinForm. This same code will work exactly the same inside of a WinForm. You could do that there as well. So give this a shot. Hopefully this gets you on the right track. If you had some questions about how to get started with ASP.NET inside Visual Studio using C Sharp, or if you ran into this looking for a way to send mail or create a mail client online or on through a browser as a WinForm. I hope everything's well. Take care.